I'm going to do a really short review on Dark Eldar, the new army. And it's slightly dated. I know the codex has been out for a month or so. But I thought I'd get some playtime in it before I actually did a review. And if you're wondering, why did none of my models look like Dark Eldar models? That's because I actually made a Hrud/Xenos army and used the Dark Eldar rules for it. And I've always thought that it's pretty cool that 40k has in the fluff all these different Xenos races that pop up, and they're either on one world or they're discussed briefly in a novel somewhere, and then we don't see them again. But what I thought is cool is you could make those armies. You have a lot of leeway. Just pick a codex and make sure you're consistent on the models. Make sure your opponent knows who's who, and you sort of go for it. So I made the Hrud using the sort of the rodent-like small diminutive creature idea, and took the Skaven models as the primary models for my army. So there are a few other things, and some of these carry over even if you're using Dark Eldar, like these Vampire Count models make great grotesques, and they're a little more dynamic than the grotesque models. So just to cover the codex, I used to have Dark Eldar and I sold them because I didn't like the way they played, and I thought in the 5th edition codex, they were really gimmicky. They had a couple of really good models that had some really cool rules, but they seemed to be kind of limited to that. And I know some people really liked it. You could have a 2-up rerollable with the Duke. You got to reroll your combat drugs with different characters. Lilith at one point had ignoring armor even on her shooting. So there were some gimmicks, and they had a tremendous variety of war gear that you could purchase. But in that way, I often felt that it was like Demons, where you're just spending all this time tracking all these different items. So personally, I actually like the new codex. I think that it did a much better job with simplifying the rules, keeping everything in a much more coherent fashion so that the units work together. You don't have as many gimmicks, and I think, to be honest, most of the named characters are not necessary. In the past, some of those named characters, you almost needed them to have a really effective army on a competitive level, and you needed to take allies and things like that. Now, currently, you can certainly take allies. You can ally Eldar or Eldar Corsairs and run it all as one army, basically, since they're battle brothers. But let's just go through the codex. I'm going to talk about some highlights, things that I've been playing and had some good experience with, and some ideas. To start with, in the HQs, I don't think you need to take any of the named HQs, but if you do, the one that I believe personally has the greatest overall utility is Urian Rakart, who I use as Urian Ratart with my rodent. But with that toughness 5 and the bubble of power from pain, he's a great character. And I guess I should back up. Dark Eldar, what they did that made this codex far better in my experience and my feeling on this is they gave the entire army power from pain that goes from turn to turn, and it improves basically each turn. So at the beginning of the game, you basically don't have any, and as it moves on, you feel no pain, and you get Furious Charge and Fearless and Hatred, and it depends on whether you're a Coven or whether you're a standard Dark Eldar codex. But I think that made bookkeeping better and made the army far more survivable. That can be improved through various things in the codex, but it seems like that's one of the big benefits. The combat drugs no longer really have a totally useless combat drug effect, though some of them are better than others. So you have that. Many of the artifacts are pretty good, though none of them are absolute musts, but some of them are pretty good in there, and I think most of them are well priced. So back into the HQs, the named ones, Lilith is still okay for close combat, but she's not awesome, and she doesn't have Eternal Warrior, nor is she poisoned. Urian Rakart is awesome for survivability. His warlord trait's kind of pointless, but he gives everyone around him a boost to their power from pain, so even on round 1, everything will feel no pain if they're within 12 inches of him. So he's a pretty good choice. You can take him as a coven also. Drazar, the Incubi warlord, he's situationally pretty cool. He's not a bad one. He has Eternal Warrior, so he's a character that you could take as a warlord and keep alive for a while. As an HQ, he's okay. He doesn't have his own warlord trait, so you can actually roll when you use him. And then the standard ones, the Homunculus and the Succubi, both are okay as warlords, as HQs. The Succubus, she's probably the lowest of the 3, I think. She has some good war gear options, but I think survivability-wise, she's not as good as an Archon. The Homunculus is pretty good because he boosts your power from pain. You can clearly take him as a Coven upgrade, or as a Coven HQ. And his major weakness is survivability due to armor. The Archon now, you can take that Shadow Field, and I think most people will. It'll give you the 2+ invulnerable save. And that doesn't end the first time you fail, so he used to take a bunch of hits at strength 2 or something, and then he'd fail once, or strength 4, and then the invulnerable save went away. Now at least makes it all the way through the full turn that you're in. So he's a little more survivable. He's pretty affordable. He lets you take the Court of the Archon, which used to be a terrible option. No one took it, but now it's actually really modifiable depending on what you want. You could take just poison 2+ witches basically with the Lamians. You could take Medusa and take a whole bunch of Medusa and 1 Archon. Or you could take a Homunculus and an Archon and take a bunch of Medusa and drop that guy with a Webway Portal with absolute unerring Deep Strike and have AP3 Flamers. So they've got some good use. Some of them, Urgul, I don't know what you'd do with that one, but they're okay. In terms of the elites in this book, there was very little change for most of them, other than I think the Mandrakes got much better. You'll actually see them used because in most cover they're going to have a 2+ save. Their shooting attack starts on round 1. They don't have to worry about getting pain tokens for it. And it's okay. It even has some AP, so it can kill things like Necrons and Eldar. So I think Mandrakes got better. Really no change to the Incubi in this book, and they still don't have assault grenades. The big change for the elites are the Homunculus Coven elites. So that would be your Grotesques, like this guy, your Homunculi, or Urian Rackart could be taken as Coven HQs, and then you could take these guys and either take a Coven formation or just a Coven army, and they end up with Fearless on round 2. They get far more survivable. I think Grotesques went from a somewhat substandard, tends to explode unit to in this current codex, a really good one. In my experience, game-wise, these guys can survive the entire game and just lay down damage like crazy. The fact that they have instant death on one of their attacks if they roll a 6 to wound is pretty cool. And the fact that they can wound anything because of poison makes them a pretty nice unit. Racks have the same thing. They have poison attacks. They don't have the instant death. And with the Covens, I'll get that in a second, they have some pretty high utility. The troops, pretty much standard. The witches, not really sure what to do with them. They got low toughness, so they're not that survivable in combat, even with a 4+ invulnerable save. So if they were cheaper, they'd be okay. But that's one troop. The other one, the Cabalites, they're pretty good for what they do. They have decent shooting attacks. Their poisoned weapons basically mean that your shooting attack is equal to the toughness of your opponent. So if you're fighting against Space Marines, those splinter rifles are the same as bolters. They're rapid fire, they wound on a 4. If you're fighting against Guard, they're the same as las guns, and if you're fighting against, Wraith troops from an Eldar Codex, they're actually pretty good because they wound on a 4. So as basic troops are okay. Trueborn didn't really change, in my opinion. They're still a good option for getting a lot of blasters on the field. The Blood Brides and the Hexatrix and stuff, I'm at a loss as to what you'd do with them. Onto the fast attacks in this codex, so much better, I think, for the majority of them. The jet fighter is now a fast attack, so it's a solid option to take. It's a good paper airplane, but it certainly drops a tremendous amount of firepower, and it's somewhat cheap. It's not overpriced. I'll say that. The Scourges, if you were to look at things, the Scourges went from maybe I'll take some unit in the 5th edition codex to now you could take heat lances or haywire guns on them. The haywire gun has a pretty good range, so it can take out pretty much any vehicle. They have an invulnerable save, they have a 4+ armor save, they're a pretty good option. So I think Scourges got much better in this codex. I think the Beast Pack, if you take Beast Packs, this is my Chimera. Beast Packs, you can now just take one model. I think people who owned tons of bird swarms are probably upset, but I don't think Beasts took quite the hit people think they did, particularly since any unit scores now, and they have 12-inch movement, and they're not bad. That being said, they're probably better fast attacks. The jet bikes, as solid as before. And I would say, in the fast attack section, the fact that you can take the transports now, if you wanted to, you could take Venoms or Raiders, and if you had Eldar allies, you could actually start them, and jump into you don't have to jump in, you could take them as fast attacks, and then you have an assault vehicle. But otherwise, not much change there. I still think also you would take the Shadow Field on your vehicles so you get a 3+ Jink, no matter what. On the heavy support, the Talos and the Kronos engines, infinitely better. I think you'll see lots of them. I've had good experience fielding them, and that toughness 7 makes them very difficult to kill. And if you have a Kronos and a Talos on the field, the fact that you could be doing Feel No Pain on a 4+ and a 3+ armor save and toughness 7 makes those guys really hard to kill. And you can take them in units now of more than one. The Ravager, if you took the disintegrator cannons on it, it puts out a lot of shots against infantry. If you take the triple Dark Lance, it's okay, but you can still get a lot of Dark Lances through other means, so I don't know about that. And the Bomber, I have no experience with it because I don't own one. So if you take the Covens, is another option for the Dark Eldar, and that's the homunculus units, so it's Grotesque, Rack, Homunculi, and Urian Rack Art, and the vehicles, the transports. If you take Covens, you can either run it as your own army or as an ally, basically a Coven supplement. Amazingly durable, highly effective units. You take Homunculus Covens and your Grotesques and Racks become fearless almost at the beginning of the game. They might be fearless at the beginning of the game, and some of the formations in here are great because you get to add a homunculus to a Talos and a Kronos, and if you take a webway portal, you can deep strike that unit. You can take the scalpel racks, and so scalpel racks let you deep strike on round 1. So you could actually have, at the beginning of round 1, no units on the board, and at the end of the turn, you could have your scalpel rack units deep strike in, and that prevents your opponent from accomplishing anything at the beginning of round 1, which means starting on round 2, you're benefiting from Powerful Pain. Some of the other formations in there, the Corpse Claw, which is 5 Talos Pain Engines in one squadron to get points for every unit they kill. Some of those are pretty cool. They take a lot of points, but they're very powerful. Other units, I think, aren't quite great. I'm not sure. Scarlet Epicureans or the Carnival of Pain, I'm not quite sure if they're really worth it. But in general, the Homunculus Covens made the Dark Eldar really durable and long-lasting. The Codex itself, I think, is far more versatile than the old one.